Just one.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar on the lands of the Kaurna people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of First Nations people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and water of South Australia. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from where you will join us from today and the First Nations people participating in this webinar. Just like to let you all know that this is being recorded and we'll be making this webinar recording available on the TiCSA website later today. And you can ask any questions in the chat function as we're going along, and we've got some time at different points where we'll
What's wrong with it?
That's the computer.
you're welcome to listen and then ask questions, or if something pops up, feel free to pop it in there as we go along. So let's jump into it. So who are we? I am Christina Belperio. I'm the Policy and Partnerships Manager with the Tourism Industry Council, and joining me today is the wonderful Meg Barker from the Department of Environment and Water. We will also be having a recording of Mr. Scott Colleen. Unfortunately, Scott was meant to be joining us live, but because we did have to shift the date of this webinar, he wasn't able to join us today. But what we've done, we've gone one better and we've recorded him, and we're going to make his segment available on our website as well, which is a fabulous resource. What we're going to cover today, we're going to talk you through the Activating Heritage Tourism program, which we're really excited is now live. And I'm sure what most of you are really keen to dive into is details of the grant program. And as I mentioned, we're going to have Scott on the line, recorded version of Scott on the line as well, which is a fantastic learning opportunity because he's going to dive into what does great heritage tourism look like and the importance of interpretation and interpretation planning, and share some great case studies from interstate that we can all learn from. And I'm now going to hand over to Meg to talk through the program.
And good morning, everyone who's joining us online. We're just so excited to partner with TiCSA in the development of this program and the rollout of the program too, to enhance the state's heritage tourism offerings. The intent is that this program will inspire and support operators of heritage tourism places and products to deliver high quality contemporary visitor experiences. It consists of two main components: activating heritage tourism webinars and workshops, as well as a grant program. So I probably should address what is heritage tourism. I know that's the big question, and it's really about making sure that we're very clear in both our guidelines and on our webinar today what heritage tourism actually is, our definition of it for the purposes of the grant. So heritage tourism is defined as travelling to experience the places, artefacts and activities that authentically represent stories and people of the past and can include cultural, historic and natural resources. So you can see from that, I'm sure, that's very broad covering of what heritage tourism is. We want every visitor to South Australia to feel transformed by evocative heritage encounters. The vitality of this state and its people is alive today in our natural and cultural heritage. There are many examples of people already running great tourism experiences, from cultural tours in the Coorong with an Unjerry to city walks in the city of Adelaide, to museum experiences, to all sorts of farm stays and all sorts of offerings around the state. So what we really want to do with this program,
make it any louder. It's a cracking old computer,
your
and
leg up,
unless you put a wireless in your ear and I adjust it to that, that's the only way. And that will take me 5-10 minutes. It's 10 years old, and it was never good to start with.
High quality heritage tourism products. We're very intentional that this program is designed to help both operators in the heritage sector become more part of the tourism family, and also to encourage tourism operators to build their own capability in their heritage offerings to enhance their own products and experiences.
This webinar today
I can
is an
hear.
opportunity to learn from an interpretation expert, as Christina said, but also to get all the lowdown on particularly our grant program rollout. Our second objective today is to activate, which is to give you the leg up through the grant program that we're offering. And it's a small grant program. And we know it's not a really huge amount of money that's on the table in this competitive grant program. But really, as I said, this is a way for us to support you to really elevate your experiences and products in heritage tourism. So I'm going to hand back to Christina so she can dive more deeply into the grant program.
Thanks, Meg. So everything I'm going to talk to you about in the right now is in the grant guidelines and the frequently asked questions document, and that is already available on our website. I cannot stress enough how important it is to read those documents thoroughly, and when you're planning your project and pitching it in your application, take account of those eligibility criteria and the assessment criteria. Please remember that this is a competitive grant program, which means that your application is going to be compared and assessed against every other application. And so that's why those assessment criteria, it's really important, because the panel, and Meg and I are not on that panel, the assessment panel have to use those criteria to assess those all the grants against each other. So, in summary, we've got a total pool of $150,000 to activate and elevate the quality of heritage tourism products in the state. The amount of grants available is between $5,000 and $15,000. And the two types of businesses that are eligible for these grants, that are the target of this program, are heritage operators who offer visitor experiences, and tourism operators who have heritage tourism products. So if you're already welcoming visitors and tourists, you might not think of yourself as a tourism operator. You might not think of yourself necessarily as a heritage operator, but if you're welcoming visitors and tourists and showcasing South Australian heritage, then this program is for you. I just thought I'd touch on the definitions of those two, and this is in the grant guidelines. But just to be clear, those in the heritage sector are businesses, organisations and community groups whose primary objective is the collection and retention of and communication of South Australian heritage and history. And tourism operators are businesses, service providers and other organisations involved in the delivery of profit and not-for-profit experiences and activities. So if you've ticked the box and you're one of those two types of businesses, what else do you need to consider to be eligible? Firstly, your project that you're putting forward must be able to be completed within 6 months. If you want to request slightly longer, an absolute maximum of 12 months, there does need to be a really strong justification put forward. But please do keep in mind what I said about your project being assessed against everyone else's. The timeliness piece is one of the assessment criteria. So if everything is equal on everything else between two projects, but one can be completed within that 6 months and another one can't, just keep in mind how those will be assessed against each other. The minimum cash contribution that you will need to make is 20% of the grant funding that you're requesting. So for example, if you requested funding of $5,000, you must contribute a minimum of $1,000 cash as your co-contribution. So your total project value in this case would be at least $6,000. If you're at the other end of that scale and you wanted to request the maximum amount of grant funding, which is $15,000, then you must contribute a minimum of $3,000 cash as your co-contribution. So in this case, your total project value will be at least $18,000. You must be registered on the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse. Sorry about the sirens outside. That's the corner of King William and Perry Street for you. So you must be registered on the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, otherwise known as ATDW. at the time of when you apply. So this is, if you are already offering tourism and visitor experiences, this is a really straightforward process, and I would really hope that you're already on there. But if not, there is a link on our webpage for this program to the ATDW support hub on the SATC's website, which talks about how you make your profile on ATDW.
Really easy.
And of course, the project can't commence until the grants are announced, which is looking like it's going to be in early to mid-June. Just touching on those organisations that are ineligible, just to be clear. So in this case, no government organisations, state, local or federal, are eligible. Unincorporated organisations or those businesses located outside of South Australia are not eligible.
That's good.
Going a bit further from the types of businesses to the types of projects and expenditure that's eligible. So as we've talked about, this is about activating heritage tourism offerings and visitor experiences. So probably the big space is that product development. So whether it's creating a new experience, heritage tourism experience, or enhancing something that's already there, it might be designing or creating interpretation signage or displays and exhibitions, or engaging professional services to help you with that product development, packaging or commissioning an experience, or possibly even developing new tour narratives as well. And as you'll hear from Scott, how important storytelling is a part of all of this. But with product development, you must show that the new product is supported by professional documentation. So in the first instance, what we're looking for is an interpretation plan that sets out and identifies, and you can link to your project that's underpinned by your interpretation plan. If you don't know what an interp plan is, hang on 10 minutes and you're going to hear a lot more about it from Scott shortly. If you don't have an interp plan, that's okay. But as long as you've got a business plan or a marketing plan, which demonstrates your intent and ambition to share Australian heritage with visitors, South Australian heritage with visitors. You could apply for engaging professional services to help with interpretation planning and projects, or marketing and visitor engagement. So, you know, it could be designing or producing marketing collateral assets, which helps to drive that visitation. You can absolutely combine a mixture of all of these in your proposed projects. And with all of the project types, I just continue to remind you to take account of those grant assessment criteria, and remember that you're being assessed competitively against all the other applications. This is the slide I don't like as much because there's a lot of writing on there and it's the negative, but it is important to note what's not eligible. And again, this is all set out in the guidelines. Projects that don't add value to the delivery of visitor experiences and those that damage heritage significance or replace or misrepresent historical facts are not eligible. Projects that aren't supported by that professional plan, as I talked about, obviously projects outside of South Australia. We're not funding directional or entrance or advertising signage. And nor will this funding be used for feasibility studies, project plans, business cases, building works and infrastructure, or purchasing any furniture or equipment. So how will projects be assessed? I cannot stress this enough. I know I've said it a few times, but it's just so important. Think about these in terms of your project, as well as how you're then describing it in your application. I've been on the other side in private industry. I've applied for many grants, and I always think of it as similar to applying for a job, where you're trying to convince an assessment panel that your project is way more deserving than everyone else's. So you need to take yourself, sometimes that might meaning taking yourself out of what your lens is and looking at it more holistically, to put yourself in the shoes of that assessment panel. The number one thing that assessment panel is going to be looking at is the impact. And by that, I mean, to what extent does your project elevate the quality of your own heritage tourism offering, but also heritage tourism products in South Australia? How does it provide a unique visitor experience that drives tourism to and around South Australia and diversifies our tourism offerings? And how does it improve visitor access and awareness of South Australian heritage places and stories? The assessment panel will also be asked to consider how your project aligns with key South Australian tourism strategies, in particular the South Australian Visitor Economy Sector Plan and the South Australian Regional Visitor Strategy. And both of these, we have links to them on our website as well if you wanted to have a look at those. They will be looking at whether it provides value for money and also that timeliness factor. And importantly, does your organisation have the capability and capacity to do the project that you're putting forward? So do you have the people and the expertise if it's something that you're proposing to do yourselves? Or do you have the contributing funds that you need if you're outsourcing and bringing in external expertise to do elements for you? And lastly, the quality of the application. This means, is it clear? Is it concise? Have you provided all the necessary supporting documentation? This includes if there's any evidence, if you require evidence of permissions or approvals to do your project. So is there a particular piece of land or particular people that you need to have approvals from? You'll need to provide evidence of that. It's not compulsory to have letters of support as part of your application, but that can always go to telling that story and that justification. If you do have other people in your community, other businesses that will benefit and they really see the value, community groups that really want to see this get up, those can always add value. But like I said, not compulsory to do that. And so the when and how to apply. Applications will open next Wednesday, the 13th of March at 9 a.m. That will be through our website, and there's the link there on the screen. So that you won't be able to see the button that now, but come next Wednesday, there'll be a button that you can go through to the application portal. It's all done online, and you'll be able to look at what it's what's being asked of you across the whole application, and then come in and out of it.
Is that our websites?
Applications close on Friday, the 19th of April, and that's a very strict deadline of 5 p.m. on that day. We will not be accepting any late applications. And so I really, again, stress, and again, having been in this boat, give yourself ample time to finalise your application. Allow for technical difficulties, allow for your computer to want to do a reset just at that point when you absolutely need to be submitting. Allow extra time and don't leave it until the last day at the last hour if you want to keep your hair colour and not go grey. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on quality tourism accreditation. So this is an added benefit for the successful grant recipients if you're not already quality tourism accredited, but TiCSA is offering 1 year access to undertake quality tourism accreditation. It is entirely optional, but we would love you to consider it. And why is that? So quality tourism accreditation, it's a series of 10 self-paced modules through an online portal, which help you to make sure you have strong tourism business foundations in place. We provide you with the tools and resources and personalised support to step you through each of the modules, which includes things like, have you got a business plan and a marketing plan, which if you're successful with your grant, I would like to think you've got those. But then you go on to make sure you have the right insurances in place. Have you got the right permits and licenses for your business? Putting in place a customer service policy, HR policies, environmental management, risk management, etc. And so we think this is a really important addition to this program, given the whole program is about enhancing our heritage tourism offerings across the state. Undertaking quality tourism accreditation will assist operators to put in place and improve their business practices and standards. It's absolutely been demonstrated. As I said, it is optional, but we will provide you with more information and support on this process if you're successful with your grant and if you choose to proceed. Of course, even if you're not successful with your grant application, it's definitely something worth considering. And if you're not already accredited, it comes with a range of other additional benefits as well. But you can just reach out to info@TiCSA.com.au if you'd like to learn more. So we are going to open it up to some questions now before we go into Scott's session, and then we will go on. So I'm just going to turn to the questions now. Alex asks, do projects need to be affiliated with a nationally or state heritage listed place or venue? The answer is no, they don't have to be, but if they are, just provide the evidence of that. That's all right, Alex. Any other questions? Please feel free to pop them in there, or if you wanted to put your hand up, we can take you off mute.
Yes, is that your question? No.
Yeah, it is.
Hi, it's Alex again.
Oops, sorry, Alex, just take your... Sorry, take yourself off mute, Alex.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, there was just another thought around, like, are there any key themes out of heritage tourism or, I don't know, just strategically, are there any stories that you're wanting to, obviously it's a very broad category or sector in terms of storytelling, like, are there any key themes that you're looking for?
Would
Would you like me to answer that?
you have a go. I feel like I've been talking a lot. Yeah.
Alex, it's intentionally broad.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. We're not chasing any specific strategic direction with the heritage that people choose to apply in this instance. So we say we're open to all of the heritage tourism operators and all of the tourism businesses who are offering our heritage experiences to apply and participate in the program.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks,
Thank
Anna. We have been asked if web design is included. That would fall under the marketing piece that I described. So as long as it's linked to activating that heritage experience, driving more visitation, driving more bookings, then that could absolutely be considered. But not just setting up a website with not that link to a heritage tourism offering. Any other questions at this point? If not, please still feel free to pop questions in the chat because we will have some time left at the end. But what we might do is move on to Scott's presentation, which is all about interpretation and the role of heritage interpretation in designing great heritage tourism experiences. I'm gonna press play.
Hi everybody, my name is Scott Colleen from Kelp Creative. I'm here today to talk to you about heritage interpretation. First of all, I want to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting, and that's the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people here in the Kulin Nation in Victoria. So what is heritage interpretation? Well, before I talk about that, let me talk to you about why Kelp. I mentioned I'm from Kelp Creative. And Kelp Creative is my consultancy company. I've been consulting for a few years, focused very much on visitor experience and interpretation and planning. But my background's a little bit mixed. So I started off a few years ago at Melbourne Zoo. I was general manager of visitor experiences there for about 15 years. And prior to that, I looked after visitor experiences at Museum Victoria, hence the dinosaurs on the bottom of the screen. And prior to that, I studied natural and cultural heritage interpretation here at Deakin University. But now I'm focusing very much on helping people craft stories that share experiences and meaningful products. And so the idea of kelp creative is the idea that kelp, if you know anything about kelp grows best when it's anchored to rock. It's the idea of an experience works best when anchored to purpose, which is a nice link into what interpretation is. So for many people, interpretation is this stuff, lots of signs. Of course, signs come in lots of different shapes and sizes. In fact, one day I'm convinced I'm going to write a PhD on what a sign actually is. But of course, it's not all about signs. A little story, I used to work with a colleague who used to introduce themselves as a person who looked after interpretation. And I remember one time someone would say to them, so you look after signs. And they calmly, very calmly explain what they did and that their role included signs, but it wasn't all about signs. But of course, what they really wanted to do was reach across the table, grab the person, shake them and say, it's not all about signs. Of course, interpretive media includes other things like audio devices, face-to-face interpretation, apps, AR, VR, interactives, sculpture, media, displays and exhibits, play, sculpture, games, nature play, performances, tracks and trails, and even facilities. Even going to the toilet can be interpretive. And of course, all of those things are the what? They're the interpretive media. Interpretation, though, is more about the why. So interpretive media, sometimes it's like putting the cart before the horse. It's a bit hard to work out exactly how you're going to tell your story if you don't know what your story is about or the why. So just to explore that a little bit further, let's step back to where it all began. Now, of course, our First Nations people have been telling stories for tens of thousands of years. When you think about the interpretation that we think of, it started with this fellow, considered to be the grandfather of interpretation, Freeman Tilden. And he wrote a series of principles in this book, Interpreting Our Heritage, based in the national park movements. So really, interpretation as we know it today, as we think of it in this context, really came from the practice of interpreting or translating natural landscapes, both their natural and cultural heritage aspects, into ways that people could better understand and better connect with. Interpretation Australia, the peak body for interpretation, defines interps as communicating ideas, information and knowledge in a way which helps visitors to make sense of their environment. So good interpretation will create engaging, unique and meaningful experiences for visitors. So it's not just about information, it's about how do we help people create meaning within spaces or products or experiences. So it's really all about being anchored to purpose. So think about what is that experience, what's really at the core or the kernel of the experience or the product that you're creating, and what's its story and how do you share that? So as I said, it's really all about storytelling. Now, why that's so important, I love this little diagram. Our brains are actually wired for storytelling. Like I said, people have been telling stories for tens of thousands of years, and our brain responds really quite differently. So on one side of the screen, you can see where the brain's activating in just two locations. That's our brain when we're listening to facts and figures. On the other side, that's how our brain responds when we're listening to stories. So you can see many more parts of the brain are activated, and in fact, what that does is produce a whole lot of other hormones in our brains, which actually helps the way that we remember things. So we remember things with more clarity and more depth and more richness when we listen to a story. So that's interpretation. Well, then what's heritage interpretation? Oh, I'm glad you asked. So heritage interpretation, of course, heritage can be natural, cultural, tangible or intangible. So what that means is really heritage interpretation is just another way of saying interpretation. In fact, overseas, the word or the term heritage interpretation is used probably more broadly than it is here. The challenge in Australia is that the term heritage interpretation has become quite linked and quite synonymous with built heritage. So as you've talked about already, interpretation is really the natural and cultural heritage of any site or place. And good interpretation will always consider all of those opportunities and all of those stories. Recently in Australia, it's become a little bit confused. And so to combat that confusion, that you'll see the term more likely interpretation being used more broadly within Australia rather than heritage interpretation. So for instance, our association is called Interpretation Australia, not Heritage Interpretation Australia. And really one of those main reasons is to try and illustrate the fact that interpretation or heritage interpretation is really both natural and cultural in its focus. So interpretive planning, let's chat a little bit about that. This idea of being story-led and experience-driven is a term I love. I did because I wrote it, but it's really about this idea of how do you drive a plan. Now, the plan depends on the scale of the project you're working on. So don't let this go, oh my gosh, my projects are too small for this. It's small or big, the plan really responds to that. But in essence, it's the same. We think about the vision, whether you're thinking about a site that you might be working on or a particular project. So what's its real purpose? What's the vision? And then the site itself, if it's a site, it might be a product or an experience or a person or a place. And then the visitors that you're engaging. So thinking about each of those as key sort of drivers. And then the overlap between those two, the spaces between are also really interesting. So between vision and site, we have the narrative. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So they're the key ingredients of your plan. The area between the site and the visitors, they're the facilities. So like we said before, even going to the toilet can be interpretive. And then the overlap between the vision and the visitors, that's all the experiences that you craft. And all of those work together to create your interpretive plan. Like I said, if you've got a large project, we'll talk about one of those in a little while, it might have multiple sites, you might have a complex plan based on something like this. But if you're working on a singular experience, you might have a simple little table that says, well, what's my purpose? What's my narrative? And we'll go through that now. So let's talk about the narrative and break that down. So for me, a narrative has these key ingredients. So a theme, a set of guiding principles so that you know you're on the right track. A bit of personality, so it defines interpretation that you're looking for in the interpretive media and what helps to define which media might suit your site or your style of presenting or whatever it may be. And then the series storylines that you use as a basis for those interpretive media. So let's start with theme. So theme, just like a costume party, I'm sure many of you will have been to a costume party at some point. And really a theme at a party is just a way of narrowing down the choices that you would have to dress up and costumes. So rather than having every single possibility in mind, it narrows it all the way down to 60s or 70s or some other weird ones that I'm sure you've been to. So a theme for interpretation works much the same way. It's a single idea to organise the information and experiences. And the key thing about this is it helps to decide what you include and, more importantly, what you leave out. Years ago, I was running theme workshops with a group of people, and halfway through, I went across to someone who was looking quite perplexed. And I said, "Are you okay?" And they went, "Yeah." And they said, "But are you saying that with a theme, we don't have to include everything?" I went, "No, that's the point. It just helps you work out what your focus is going to be." And there was just a sense of relief that this person who knew quite a lot of information was relieved that they didn't have to include all of that in that one little talk that they were preparing. So a theme, whether you call it a theme or a key message or the moral of the story, I'll leave that up to you. But the intent's the same. It's thinking about what the core intent of that experience or product is, and then using that as a basis or the anchor for the interpretation and the experience you develop. A couple of examples for Wirrabee Yallock, which is a river near where I live. This idea of safeguarding the future of Wirrabee Yallock, or the Wirrabee River. It must flow through people's hearts just as it does the landscape. So it's an example of talking about the natural landscape, but also its impact on people. So quite an emotional component. And interpretation is often quite emotional. So moving from the idea it's not just information, but what's that sense of meaning about that place and what's its sense of purpose. Another example, Victorians' love for the coast is its greatest threat, but also its greatest hope. So talking about the challenge that people have in wanting to explore the coast, the issues that has around conflict with wildlife, pollution, all those things, but also that desire to explore the coast is the same idea that would lead to its protection. So, tips for making interpretation as engaging as possible. A couple of ideas for you to think about as we go through. So, challenge yourself. Talked about interpretive media, we've talked about signs and AR and all sorts of things. One of the tricks I think is to always try something new. If you might be used to a particular type of media, maybe you're focused very much on signage, maybe you're focused on sort of tours or leaflets or pamphlets, whatever it may be, but how do you challenge yourself? This was one I did at Zoos Victoria when I worked there. One of the objectives was try and help people be better aware of this little endangered frog. Crabby frogs are about the size of your fingernail, a bit bigger, border of Victoria and New South Wales, highly endangered. And so rather than just creating, we had these little sculptures you see in the foreground. We did those in the first instance. that got some engagement, but we got from research not much more recall in terms of remembering the species name. So we created the thing behind it, which was a frog disco. Worked with the Wiggles. They had a song called the Corroboree Frog. So inside there's this digital dance floor, giant Corroboree Frog on top. As a result of that, we had 26% more people remember that frog as coming through. So example of being a little bit out of the box. Element of surprise always works, using surprise as a hook to really grab people's attention when they're not expecting something, they're often more engaging. This is a project up in Brisbane with the Brisbane Environment Centres. They were wanting to engage people more along this mudflats area where they were originally allowed to have dogs off leash and moving to a leash, dogs on leash area. And so they set up this little dining table to demonstrate and interpret that the mudflat is actually a home. They might think about it as a place to walk the dog and a place of leisure, but it's actually a home for these native birds. So they set up a dining table. It's in the middle of the mudflats, and people would come over and go, "What is this about?" And so it really hooked people in so they could have that conversation about dogs and birds. Build a toolkit. So as you go, as you're experimenting, try new things, don't throw them away, keep them to the side. Whether it's a physical toolkit you build like this one, which is a community conservation toolkit at Zoos Victoria, or whether it's a metaphorical one. But the idea is, experiment, try. And if it doesn't work the first time, don't throw it away, keep it for a rainy day and try it again another time. And be brave. This is one of my favourite characters at Hillsville Sanctuary, Crap Man. It was a campaign that Zoos was running around using recycled toilet paper, as in toilet paper made from recycled paper, not toilet paper used twice. But Crap Man was a great character. Lots of controversy over having a person walking around the zoo called Crap Man, but he was great. And I think he just really symbolised that idea of just being brave and trying something new. And I said another idea, sometimes here it's sense of, you've got to have big budgets to big ideas means big budgets, and it doesn't always. This is a lovely little story from a local cafe, Mary Lou's Cafe, and when they were opening up, they just really wanted to share their story with people about what they do. And it's, the way we did it is in chatting to them, talking about what they do and why they do, again, finding out that sort of that core, that kernel. And it was that idea that really they do it because food brings them together. They do it at home with family and they do it in the community. There's a little panel there that just tells their story, and lots of people come in and engage with that, and it's a good conversation starter. But again, really simple, really small in budget, but just a real clear idea and delivered well. Now, if you need some help, thoughts, guidance, talk to like-minded people, have a chat to the folks in Interpretation Australia. As I said, the key body within Australia. They're also a gateway to similar organisations around the world. In fact, they're part of the Global Alliance for Interpretation. Website's there, and certainly the links will be available. Certainly a great resource to check out and just continue on your interpretive journey. And really, the key thing, just to remind, we'll take a look at a couple of examples in a second, but this idea of being story-led and experience-driven really makes a difference, I believe. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of how that works. So this one example, Bass Coast here in Victoria, Bass Coast Shire Council, working on a trail, dinosaurs trail. And the really interesting thing about that, if you're familiar with that part of the coast, down near Phillip Island, between San Remo and Inverloch, it has the world's most unique polar dinosaurs, strangely enough, but it's true. It's also the site of Australia's first dinosaur fossil that was found in the early 1900s, and a really interesting site. But again, probably not anything you would know from looking at the coastline. But in going through this process, starting off with the theme, and you can see the theme there up at the top, which is this idea that exploring polar dinosaurs along Victoria's Bass Coast reveals layers of stories fueled by 40 years of groundbreaking discoveries and the dinosaur dreamers who search for dinosaurs, but ultimately search for the lessons dinosaurs can teach us about our future. So theme, core idea, a series of principles. We mentioned principles before. You can see those there. Things like discovery, the hero dinosaurs, curated, being a launch pad, all those sorts of things. And then a series of sites. So in this case, are those five sites, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sites across there from Inverloch to San Remo. Each of those has a unique story. So, for example, at Inverloch, Science, Art and Imagination really talks about the science that underpins dinosaur hunting, whereas at Caves, it's about the passion and perseverance. which is the idea that rather than focusing on the dinosaurs themselves, we actually wouldn't know anything about those dinosaurs without the people that have made those discoveries. So that site, that piece of the puzzle, if you will, really focuses on the people behind those stories. Whereas, for example, Kilcunda is about the forces of nature and time. It's about those environmental forces that shape the coast, but also have preserved and now exposing those fossils. Then each one of those sites has its own personality. So if we think about Inverloch again, that little adventure playground, it's imaginative, playful and sensory, whereas the caves, which is about passion and perseverance, is about human, intimate and reflective. And so the interpretive media, we work with a number of artists who have developed these concepts that responded to that. So the idea of imaginative, playful and sensory is an adventure playground, whereas human, intimate and reflective at the caves is a stop animation. So I'm just going to flick across to another screen so we can have a look at what that looks like in the flesh. So I'm going to jump onto a website that was developed to really help promote that idea and really demonstrate what the concept was about. And I'll just grab up that website now. So this is a website you can sort of jump on and have a look at the Bass Coast dinosaurs, jump on and have a look. I'll just show you a couple of the sites that we mentioned. So if we come across to Inverloch. So Inverloch was that dinosaur hunters playground, and we talked about the fun and playful and imaginative. And you can sort of see these concepts here and see how the text that was developed. So remember, these are at concept stage. Council's now looking for funding to deliver these. And each of those responds back to that interpretive narrative that was developed. So this idea of, what it's like to discover a fossil. They're the discoveries of await dinosaur hunters. So again, what's the science that underpins those? The whole playground was developed based on those same concepts and ideas. And you can see the storyline there of science, art and imagination that we know, basically what we know based on 40 years of research. So the idea of that research really underpins that site. And then if we have a look at, let's have a look at the caves. So the caves, that was the idea of the people behind those discoveries. So this was the artist's interpretation of that, which I just love, called pocket paleontologists. And so it's the idea of the little stop animation characters based on each, a number of the scientists working on the project. So again, digital dinosaur hunters. So again, you can see how that relates back to the interpretive narrative. And then these are some of the characters. So run down a bit further. So Jake's a paleontologist. He's doing his PhD in what are called megaraptors, which are giant dinosaurs. Well, not giant, they're about the size of a horse. Down here, unlike other places in Australia, we didn't get giant dinosaurs. But Jake is focused very much on these meat-eating dinosaurs. He just loves them. But again, and Mike is a prospector. Mike spent much of his life down along the coast finding dinosaurs, and he was a key driver behind the whole Dinosaurs Trail. So both those characters, and there's another one, I think Leslie was further up. If I scoot back, Leslie will come up in a second. Leslie calls that she is. So Leslie, her favorite animal's not a dinosaur, actually, it's a turtle. So she got a turtle character. But it's really that whole idea of, in this case, the story identified there was about the people and the passion and perseverance it takes to take, and you can see how that's being delivered. So this is an example of a large scale project, but you can see how it could be a trail that has a multiple series of points along the way. They might be small sites. It might be a single site, but how the idea from a really well-conceived narrative creates that blueprint to deliver sort of great interpretive experiences. So for me, I hope you enjoyed those. I really just wanted to provide a bit of an overview of interpretation and heritage interpretation, and the sort of planning process, and the idea that being story-led and experience-driven can make a difference. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Scott, for that really insightful piece there. And I hope for all of you online that really triggered some, light bulb moments for you about that idea of having that plan, that interpretation plan that sets out and sets you on your way for what that storytelling is going to be in terms of your experience. So what's next in terms of the program? As I said, the grant applications will open next Wednesday, the 13th of March, via our website. But the other piece that I'm really excited about, and hopefully listening to Scott just then got you excited about as well, is we're doing an online workshop around storytelling for heritage tourism. So that's going to be on Monday, the 18th of March, with the wonderful Steve Davis, who is an amazing storyteller and is very passionate about our heritage and history. So it should be really enjoyable. So please do, again, jump on that same webpage and there'll be a link to take you through the registration for that if you'd like to join us. And there is a raft of information on that webpage, the grant guidelines, as I said, frequently asked questions document, the recording of Scott's piece just then. You can rewatch that, share it with colleagues as you will, as well as we'll get the recording from this webinar up today as well. We also have a written resource that steps through what is interpretation and how do you go about interpretation planning, which Scott Colleen has developed for us, and that's on that website as well. So really helpful tools there for you. So for now, we do have a little bit of time left if there are more questions. We've got a couple of them in the chat there. One of them is asking if there's professional people that can help with grant design. There absolutely is. I know one of them was on the line, but has left. But I can connect you with that person afterwards, Regina, if you'd like me to. But yeah, there's a raft of people around that can help with grant design and grant applications. If there's anyone else on the line who does do that, please feel free to pop your name in the chat there, and I've got no problems with you promoting those services. And Paul has asked about being as a state government agency, the History Trust of SA. Yeah, the answer to your question is no, you're not eligible for this grant program. So if there's any other questions, please do pop them in there. Paul, the History Trust would a partnership with another tourism focused operator provider. And yes, absolutely. If a commercial provider who is operating in that space wants to apply, then yeah, absolutely. We think that's great. We love that level of collaboration, and we think that's a great idea. It absolutely enhances that visitor experience for sure. Any other questions, guys? You can always get in touch via the email that's on the screen there, info@TiCSA.com.au, or call the office here. But please do have a look through those documents as well, and in case your questions can be easily answered there. So if there's no more questions, just my eyes keep darting to the screen over here. Really want to thank everyone for your time today, for joining us and your interest in this program. We're really excited about it. And as Meg said at the beginning, we know that sometimes it's those little injections of funds that can make a really big difference to some of our visitor experiences around the state. So we're really excited to see your ideas and your projects that come forward through the grant application process. And please do consider registering for this storytelling workshop with Steve Davis on the 18th of March. Yes, the recording from today, we will get that up onto our website, probably by later today, by the time we've downloaded it, Sarah. Alison has asked, we would like to develop a simulated buggy ride. As this, no, that I think would fit the bill. That's, you know, that falls under developing an experience. Obviously, there's a physical component to that, but yeah, that sounds like a really exciting idea there, Alison. Oh, okay, yes, Sarah. So Kelp's Help Creative that recording is already up on our website as a separate recording, so you can look at that and share that as you want. And then what we'll also do is the recording from this webinar will get up on our website as well. Will Steve's workshop be recorded? I'll have to come back to you on that one. I can't remember what we decided on that one, but I will come back. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. As I said, have a wonderful day. Please stay cool wherever you are around the state. And as I said, we look forward to receiving some fabulous grant applications over the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone.